My name is Claire Bennett. 15 years ago, I was kicked out of my home for being pregnant. No questions, no compassion. Just a locked door and silence. What my parents never cared to know was this: the child they abandoned me for would one day bring an entire concert hall to its feet. And when they finally came to see him, standing under stage lights, carrying the name they once tried to erase, they couldn't speak. They couldn't even look at me. This is the story of what happens when the ones who rejected you come face to face with what they threw away. If you've ever been cut off, shut down, or made to feel small, this one's for you. I was 19 when my father told me I was no longer his daughter. I remember the weight of the silence in the living room, the kind that doesn't just fill a space, but suffocates it. The air felt heavy with unspoken disappointment. My mother, Mary Ann, sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, her knuckles white around a balled-up tissue. My sister, Sophie, stood near the fireplace, arms folded across her chest, eyes narrowed with a look that said she'd already made up her mind. And my father, Edward Bennett, stood behind the armchair like a judge presiding over a trial he didn't believe needed a defense. The pregnancy test sat on the coffee table like a piece of evidence. I hadn't meant for anyone to find it. I had tucked it into the back of the vanity drawer hidden beneath cotton balls and an old bottle of aspirin. But my mother, ever the housekeeper, had found it while doing her routine deep cleaning of the upstairs bathroom. No one asked me if it was real. No one asked if I was okay. They didn't even ask whose it was. "You will not bring shame into this house," my father said, his voice calm in that terrifying way I had only heard once before. At my grandmother's funeral, when he had spoken with the same grim finality. Not under this roof. I sat on the edge of the armchair, my legs numb, my hands trembling. I opened my mouth to speak, to tell them everything. About Julian, about his diagnosis, about why we'd made the decision we had. But before I could find the words, Sophie stepped forward, eyes gleaming with that cold clarity she had always wielded like a blade. "Mom's been crying all morning because of you," she said sharply. "She had to sit through choir practice pretending everything was fine. Do you even care what this does to her?" It wasn't a question. It was a conviction. I looked at my mother. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, then quickly away as if ashamed to see me still sitting there. She didn't say a word. Not one. "I'm not getting rid of the baby," I said finally, quietly, but firmly. "His name is Julian, and he's dying. That should have changed everything." "It didn't." "What kind of man knocks up a girl and then vanishes?" My father snapped. "He didn't vanish," I said. "He's in the hospital. He has leukemia. My voice cracked. "We decided together. He wanted to leave something behind." It wasn't a lie. Julian had been the one to say it first, weeks after the initial diagnosis, after the hair loss started and the chemo made him too weak to sit upright. His voice had been soft, then barely above a whisper. "Claire, if I don't make it, I want to leave a piece of myself with you. Not out of fear, out of love." But standing in that room surrounded by the people who raised me but couldn't seem to see me anymore, I knew those words would never be enough. My father turned away. "If you're choosing this path," he said, "you'll walk it alone. Pack your things." That was it. No discussion, no compromise, no questions. Sophie followed me upstairs as I grabbed what little I could fit into a duffel bag. My fingers fumbled over the zipper as I tried not to cry. "You always needed attention," she muttered. "I just never thought you'd go this far to get it." I turned to her, stunned. "You really think I got pregnant to compete with you?" she scoffed. "You knew Mom and Dad would react like this, but you went ahead anyway. Now you're making them suffer for it." "They don't even know him," I said, voice rising despite myself. "They don't know what I'm going through, what he's going through. They don't want to," she said. "And honestly, neither do I. That was the last thing Sophie said to me." I walked down the staircase with my bag slung over one shoulder, trying not to look back. My mother stood by the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed, her lips tight. My father held the front door open. Not for me to return, but to leave. As I stepped out into the dusk, I heard him say it, low and final. "If you walk out now, don't come back." I turned and looked him square in the eye, my voice steadier than I felt. "Then I guess I'm not your daughter anymore." I remember the way the door closed behind me. Not with a slam, but with the quiet finality of something that was never meant to reopen. I walked down the sidewalk in the fading light, the autumn wind curling around my coat, pressing against the place where life was growing inside me. I hadn't told Julian yet. I hadn't told him how they'd reacted. How even after all the promises and prayers, my family had chosen their reputation over me. And even then, I still wasn't sure which heartbreak hurt more. The betrayal of the people who raised me, or the growing certainty that Julian might never meet the child he'd asked me to carry. I didn't know where I'd sleep that night. I didn't know who I could call. But I knew one thing: I wasn't going back. Not now. Not ever. Before everything broke, before the silence and slammed doors, there was music. Julian Hayes wasn't like anyone else at North Haven High. While other boys chased touchdowns or popularity, Julian carried a cello case on his back like it was an extension of his spine. He had this quiet confidence, the kind that didn't demand attention, but commanded it anyway. The first time I heard him play during a spring recital, I sat in the third row and cried without knowing why. It wasn't just the music. It was the ache beneath it, like he was trying to say something he didn't have words for yet. We met properly in our junior year. English class, Shakespeare, of course, Romeo and Juliet. We were paired for a project, and I still remember the way he leaned across the table, smiled, and said, "I promise I won't make you do all the work." That was the beginning. Julian was the kind of person who saw things in people, things they'd stopped seeing in themselves. He told me once that I carried pain like armor, that I listened more with my eyes than with my ears, that I noticed the silences between people. He said it like a compliment. We became inseparable. Study sessions turned into late-night phone calls. Cello practice breaks became slow walks around the block. When he was accepted to Juilliard with a partial scholarship, we ran around the school parking lot like two little kids who'd just won the lottery. I'd already been accepted into a pre-nursing program at NYU, which felt perfect. Our campuses were just a subway ride apart. Ma'am. We dreamed of sharing a tiny apartment in Brooklyn with peeling paint and bad plumbing, but with a view of the skyline if you stood on the kitchen table. We talked about everything: where we wanted to travel, how many kids we might one day have, what names we loved, how we'd split chores and bills, and what color to paint the walls. But some dreams don't get time to grow. Julian started feeling tired all the time. At first we chalked it up to stress, final exams, auditions, life. But then came the bruises, the ones that lingered too long. The night he bled from a nosebleed that wouldn't stop, we sat in the ER together. His hand clenching mine so tightly I could feel his pulse in my wrist. Acute myeloid leukemia, stage aggressive, already advanced. I remember the sound of the doctor's voice. Calm, rehearsed, but distant, like it was echoing from inside a tunnel I couldn't get out of. Julian just nodded, asking questions like he was preparing for a test. I sat there frozen, watching his world begin to fracture. He started treatment the following week. Chemo turned his olive skin gray, stripped away his curls, and left him shivering through the night. I brought him smoothies he couldn't keep down and books he couldn't finish. We watched old movies with the volume low and my hand in his, as if the silence could hold us together. And then one night, between treatment cycles, when the pain eased just enough for him to sit up and talk for real, he turned to me and said, "I'm scared I'll disappear." "You won't," I told him. "I'll remember you. Always." "That's not enough," he whispered. "I want something to stay. I want there to be a part of me in this world, Claire. Even if I'm not, I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't understand, but because I understood too well. The idea didn't come from panic. It came from love, the kind that knows the odds but still dares to hope. We talked for hours about what it would mean, about the risks, about the future we might never see but could still gift to someone else. We weren't reckless. We weren't naive. We were heartbreakingly aware. When I found out I was pregnant 2 months later, I sat in the parking lot of the clinic for over an hour, clutching the test result in my hand and trying to catch my breath. I wasn't scared of being a mother. I was scared of doing it without him. I told Julian that evening. He was lying in a hospital bed, too weak to sit up but still fully alert, when I whispered the words, "I'm pregnant." His eyes filled with something that looked like both sorrow and peace. He reached beneath his pillow and pulled out a small box. A velvet ring box. Inside was a delicate silver band with a tiny sapphire. "It was my grandmother's," he said, placing it in my hand. "I wanted to give it to you before the audition. I never got the chance. I didn't need a proposal. I didn't need a wedding. That ring meant more than a ceremony ever could. It was a promise. A life. A name. A legacy." As I slipped the ring onto my finger, Julian rested his hand on my belly, still flat, but now carrying our future. He closed his eyes and smiled just for a moment. "Tell them about me," he whispered. "Tell our baby I loved them before I even knew them." I promise, I said, tears slipping down my cheeks. Julian passed away 3 weeks later. He never got to hear the sound of our child's heartbeat. He never got to see the curve of my growing belly. But he gave me something stronger than fear, stronger than loss. He gave me purpose, and a promise I carry to this day. After Julian died, the world didn't stop. I think part of me expected it to. I remember walking out of the hospital that morning, the sky a soft gray people rushing past with coffee cups and grocery bags, like it was any other Tuesday. My world had ended, and somehow no one noticed. I stayed with Julian's parents for a little while. Linda and Henry Hayes were kind people, gentle and grieving. They made room for me in their spare bedroom, brought me ginger tea for my nausea, and tried not to cry in front of me. We were 3 broken hearts beating under the same roof, trying to find rhythm again. But the truth was they were drowning. Julian's medical bills had wiped them out. Henry had taken a second mortgage on the house to cover the last round of treatment, and Linda had stopped working to care for Julian full-time during his final months. I could see the wear on their faces, the quiet arguments behind closed doors, the unopened mail piling on the table, the way Henry stared blankly at the gas bill, as if willing the numbers to shrink. I wanted to stay. God, I did. But I couldn't be another weight on their already burdened shoulders. So I left. No grand farewell. Just a folded note on the kitchen table and a silent prayer that they'd understand. I told myself I'd come back someday when I had something to offer, when I was someone worth welcoming again. For the next 3 weeks, I lived in my car. It was an old Honda Civic, the same one Julian used to joke would outlive us all. The back seat became my bed, the glove compartment my nightstand. I parked behind a 24-hour laundromat so I could use the restroom without raising suspicion. During the day, I showered at the local YMCA with a towel I kept in a plastic grocery bag. I was 5 months pregnant, alone, hungry, and scared in ways I hadn't known were possible. My savings had evaporated fast, between prenatal vitamins, gas, and the cheapest food I could find. I worked evening shifts at a rundown diner off Route 41, bussing tables and refilling ketchup bottles while pretending my swollen feet didn't ache, and the ache in my chest wasn't loneliness. No one at the diner knew. Not really. I wore loose sweaters and oversized aprons. I smiled when customers made small talk and laughed at jokes that didn't land. I counted tips in the back storage room and reminded myself, just keep going. But then one night I got sick. Not morning sickness. This was deeper, harsher. A cold that had settled into my lungs, turning every breath into sandpaper. I woke up in the middle of the night, coughing so hard I gagged, and Still, I dragged myself to work the next evening because I couldn't afford to lose the job. That's when Tina Marshall noticed. Tina was the type of woman who didn't say much unless it mattered. Early 30s curly hair always pulled into a messy ponytail, eyes sharp enough to slice through pretense. She worked the morning shift, but we overlapped for about 20 minutes during changeover. That night, she watched me fumble the salt shaker, nearly drop a tray, and finally lean against the counter to catch my breath. "You living in your car?" she asked, like she was asking if I wanted coffee. I froze. What? Tina wiped her hands on a dish towel. "You've got a blanket in your back seat. Windows are fogged every morning. And you keep changing in the bathroom like you're not going anywhere after—" I didn't answer. She didn't press. Instead, she slid a set of keys across the counter. My couch pulls out. It's not fancy, but it's warm. I've got a 4-year-old who sleeps like a rock and eats way too many fish sticks. You're welcome to crash until you figure things out. I stared at her like she'd just offered me the moon. "I can't," I whispered. "I don't want to." "Claire," her voice softened. "One mother helps another. No one should bring a baby into this world from the back seat of a car." Something broke in me then. Not loudly, just a quiet, crumbling sort of break. The kind that happens when you've been holding yourself together with sheer will and borrowed hope. I didn't cry. Not then. But I nodded. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept on something that didn't come with seatbelts. Tina's apartment was small. Just 2 rooms and a kitchen that doubled as a hallway. Her daughter Maya greeted me in mismatched pajamas and offered me half a crayon like it was treasure. Tina gave me the pull-out couch, a real blanket, and a stack of clean towels. "I don't need your story," she said, pulling out a frozen pizza. "Just promise me you'll sleep. And eat." I nodded again. I didn't realize how much I'd needed permission. Just to rest, just to be. Over the next few days, I found my rhythm. Tina left early for work and came back with juice boxes and coupons. Maya adopted me like an ant, climbing into my lap with picture books and unanswerable questions. I still worked the diner at night, still counted tips. But now I had a pillow. I had people. I had dignity again. Tina never asked for anything in return. "You'll pay it forward," she said when I tried to offer her gas money one night. That's how this works. She was right. I would... someday. The contractions started on a rainy Thursday evening in mid-October. I was barely 34 weeks along. I thought it was just the usual cramping at first. I'd been overdoing it. Working late shifts at the diner, sleeping on Tina's pull-out couch, and pretending I wasn't scared every time I felt the baby kick harder than usual. But this was different. Sharper. Rhythmic. It came in waves and stole the breath from my chest. Tina didn't ask questions. She just grabbed her car keys and Maya's hoodie. By the time we reached the emergency room at the county hospital, I could barely walk without bracing myself against the walls. They admitted me within minutes. Tina held my hand through the intake forms, coached my breathing, when the contractions came faster, and argued with a nurse who dared call me just another unwed mother. "He's not due yet," I whispered at one point, panic rising like a tide in my throat. Tina squeezed my hand. Neither was Maya. Premature doesn't mean unready. You're both stronger than you think. It was a long, exhausting blur of pain and machines and a cold delivery room that smelled like bleach and fear. I remember the moment he was born, 5 pounds 3 ounces, tiny and pink and angry at the world. The doctor held him up. "He's breathing on his own," someone said. "That's a good sign." And just like that, I became a mother. I named him Noah Hayes Bennett. Hayes for Julian, Bennett for me. Noah because something in me needed a name that meant refuge. Because that's what he already was to me. A reason to keep going, even when I had nothing left. They kept him in the NICU for 10 days. I visited every morning before work and every night after. I sang to him softly through the incubator glass, told him stories about his father, promised we'd find a way to make it together. Tina came when she could. Maya made him a drawing of stick figures and rainbows. "This is you," she told him through the plastic. "You're gonna be okay." The day they let me take him home, I cried in the hospital elevator, clutching the car seat like it held the whole world. Because it did. Back at Tina's apartment, I set up Noah's corner between the couch and the window. Just a borrowed bassinet and a diaper bag, but it was ours. Still, I knew we couldn't stay long. Tina had already given more than most people would. Her lease didn't allow long-term guests, and while she never complained, I saw the way her shoulders tensed every time the landlord's truck pulled into the lot. I needed something better. Not just for me. For Noah. One afternoon when Noah was about 3 weeks old, I stopped at a gas station after work to grab a gallon of milk and a pack of diapers. I hadn't slept in nearly 2 days. I was wearing mismatched socks and still had spit up on my sleeve. I was trying to fish quarters out of my purse with one hand while balancing Noah's car seat on my hip. "Claire Bennett," a voice said behind me. I turned and blinked. Standing by pump 4 in a blue raincoat and silver hair pinned back with a pencil was Mrs. Evelyn Moore, my high school English teacher. I hadn't seen her in over 15 years. "Mrs. Moore?" I croaked, embarrassed and startled. "Hi." She looked at me then at the car seat in my arms. Her gaze wasn't judgmental. It was something softer, something that made me want to cry on the spot. "You're a mother now," she said, more observation than question. I nodded. She tilted her head. "Do you have a place to stay?" "I'm figuring things out," I mumbled. She didn't push. She just nodded once, then handed me her card. "I live off Ashbury Lane now. Big house, empty most of the time. There's a finished basement, has its own bathroom and a door that locks. Come by if you need a safe place. Just for a while." I hesitated. "Mrs. Moore, I don't—" She cut me off gently. "Claire, you don't owe love to people who only noticed you when they needed something." That stopped me cold. It was the first time someone had put words to what I'd been carrying. The weight of being forgotten, then remembered only as a burden. The ache of being visible only in crisis. Her words cracked something open in me. A space for dignity, not pity. I showed up 2 days later. Her basement was cozy with cream-colored walls and an old reading chair in the corner. Then she brought down blankets, baby clothes, and a slow cooker full of stew. She didn't ask for rent, just asked that I rest, heal, start again. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn became something I didn't realize I'd been missing. A mother who listened without trying to fix, who guided without guilt. She helped me apply for online nursing courses, walked me through financial aid forms, printed syllabi from her upstairs computer, held Noah when I needed a nap, sat with me in silence when grief knocked the wind out of me. Every time I doubted myself, every time I said I couldn't possibly go back to school or find work that mattered, or be enough for this little life I now held, she repeated that same line. "You don't owe love to people who only noticed you when they needed something." It became my shield, my mantra, the thread I clung to when the rest of the world still felt like it had moved on without me. Evelyn didn't try to replace the mother I lost. She became the kind of woman I hoped to grow into. And in the quiet moments when Noah slept on my chest and Evelyn graded papers upstairs, I started to believe maybe I wasn't broken beyond repair. Maybe this was the beginning. There was no single moment when my life turned around, no lightning bolt, no grand reveal, just a series of small, deliberate choices made when no one was watching. That's how healing happens, I think. Not in fireworks, but in quiet repetition. Evelyn's basement became our sanctuary for nearly 2 years. I completed my online nursing program from the tiny desk in the corner often, with Noah napping in my lap or babbling beside me in his bouncer. Evelyn printed every assignment for me, helped me edit essays, and tested me with flashcards while dinner simmered upstairs. Noah grew quickly. His eyes as dark and knowing as Julian's, his laugh deep and bubbling. By age 2, he was stacking books into towers and dancing every time music played. Evelyn swore he could hum on key before he could form sentences. When I finally graduated, I wore my cap and gown in her living room. Evelyn cried harder than I did. The day I started my first job at Hartford Children's Hospital was the first time I felt like I could breathe without apologizing for taking up space. I was a pediatric nurse, not just because it paid better than the diner, but because I knew what it meant to hold a sick child's hand when a parent couldn't be there. I knew what it was like to memorize the beep of an IV monitor, to dread the quiet that came after too much pain. I had lived it. Now I got to offer something different to others' presence, compassion and steady hands. We moved into our own apartment a few months later. It was a tiny 2-bedroom above a bakery that smelled like warm sugar on rainy days. The landlord didn't mind crayon drawings on the wall or late rent once in a while. It was ours. Every evening after work, I'd sit on the floor with Noah watching him line up toy animals and tell stories about each one. By 4, he was playing melodies on a toy keyboard that I couldn't explain. By 5, he had perfect pitch. Evelyn gifted us a second-hand upright piano for Christmas that year, and I found him at it constantly, tapping keys gently like he was listening for something no one else could hear. "He's got his father's fingers," Evelyn whispered one night, watching from the doorway. "His heart, too," I said. I kept a jar in the top cabinet marked Music Dreams Fund. I dropped my tip money from the hospital cafeteria there. Every overtime shift, every birthday gift I didn't spend. By the time Noah turned 7, it was enough to enroll him in formal lessons at the Community Music Conservatory. His first instructor pulled me aside after 3 sessions and asked if Julian had been a musician. I nodded. "Cello, Juilliard bound." The teacher smiled. "Well, his son's heading that way too." That night I found the silver ring Julian had given me, still on the chain I wore under my uniform, and held it against my lips. "He's still here, Jules." In every note. 7 years after Noah was born, I bought our first home. It wasn't grand, just a small single-story cottage on the edge of town with peeling shutters and a tiny garden patch in back, but it had a fence Noah could kick his soccer ball against and a sunlit corner perfect for the piano. The mortgage terrified me, but every month I made it work. Somehow. Because this time we weren't surviving. We were living. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry and humming to myself, the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Connecticut area code corporate tone. I nearly let it go to voicemail. I'm glad I didn't. "Ms. Claire Bennett," a calm voice said. "I'm calling from the legal department representing New Gene Pharmaceuticals. You were listed as the contact and next of kin for Julian Hayes. May I take a moment of your time?" My chest tightened. I hadn't heard Julian's full name spoken aloud like that in years. "Yes, I managed," the voice continued. "Mr. Hayes participated in a Phase 2 oncology drug trial during the last year of his life. The treatment eventually contributed to the development of a new protocol that's now in wide use. As part of a class action ethics settlement, New Gene is issuing education trusts for the children of deceased participants." I sank into a chair. "Your son, Noah Hayes Bennett, is eligible. The trust will cover full tuition and fees at any accredited institution through undergraduate education, with additional stipends for private preparatory training if applicable." I couldn't speak, couldn't move. "There's nothing you need to do to accept," the caller added gently. "We just thought you should know. His father made a difference." I hung up and stared at the kitchen wall. A drawing of a treble clef Noah had taped there fluttered slightly in the breeze from the open window. I cried then. Not loud, not broken, but a slow, heaving kind of cry that came from the deepest place in me. The place that had for years rationed every decision. that had spent nights choosing between diapers and gas, between over-the-counter meds, and enough groceries to stretch 3 dinners. That day, for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to choose. I could buy my son strings for his violin and shoes that fit the same week. I could let him dream bigger than I had. That evening I sat beside Noah as he practiced his latest composition, something soft and fluttering like birdsong, and told him the truth. "Your father helped create medicine that's saving lives now," I said, "and because of him you'll never have to worry about college. He took care of us even now." Noah didn't say much. He just nodded, then reached for my hand and placed it on the keys. "Play with me," he whispered. And so I did. Clumsy fingers, hesitant chords. But still, together. The first time I saw our names in print, my Noah's and Julian's, it wasn't in a hospital registry or a utility bill. It was in the Sunday edition of the Hartford Post under the headline, "Teen Composer Honors Late Father at Lincoln Center." There was a photo. Noah in a navy suit standing at a grand piano under golden stage lights, his fingers poised like they belonged there. The article told the story of a boy born from heartbreak now turning that grief into music. It mentioned the Julian Hayes Foundation, the performance, and even quoted one of Noah's instructors. He doesn't just play. He remembers. I read the article 3 times before I let myself feel anything. Then I folded the page carefully and slipped it into a wooden box labeled Legacy, right next to Julian's silver ring, a copy of Noah's first piano composition and the hospital wristband from the day I became a mother. The foundation had started small, just a side project with Evelyn's encouragement and some leftover grant money from a pediatric advocacy program. We helped cover non-medical expenses for families of children undergoing cancer treatment, gas cards, temporary housing, childcare stipends, grocery vouchers. The things no one talks about until you're sitting in a waiting room wondering how you'll pay for both medicine and dinner. But once the story aired, donations poured in. Volunteers, letters, families who said we thought we were alone. Noah didn't understand the magnitude of it all at first. He just knew he was playing a piece he wrote for his dad in a place that echoed. "It's called Carry Me." He told the audience that night, his voice steady despite the 1,000 seats watching. "It's about holding on when someone has to go." He played it like a conversation, with sorrow, yes, but also with hope. The kind of hope I hadn't dared imagine 15 years ago, curled up in a diner bathroom trying not to cry too loudly. I thought that night would mark a closing chapter, that maybe now the past had found its place. I was wrong. 3 days after the article ran, an email appeared in my inbox. Subject line: reaching out from Sophie Carter. Claire. I know it's been a long time. Mom and Dad saw the news segment and read the article. They were moved. Dad hasn't stopped looking at Noah's picture. They would like to meet him. If you're open to that, I don't expect a response. Just wanted to put it out there. Sophie. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking like it was waiting for me to fill in a space I wasn't sure I wanted to revisit. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, then pulled back. I closed the laptop and called Evelyn. She answered on the second ring as she always did. Everything all right? I told her about the article, the email, the request. There was a pause. Then, "They don't deserve him." "I know," I whispered. "But that doesn't mean he doesn't deserve the truth," she added softly. I sat with that. "You've built this life," she continued. "Brick by brick. You've protected him, taught him, loved him more fiercely than most people ever get to feel. They had a chance, and they walked away. Don't forget that." "I haven't," I said, voice tight. "Good. Because this isn't about them. It's about Noah. If he ever wants to know where he came from, let him choose. But make sure he knows he is yours, not theirs." Those words settled deep, like anchors in a storm. That night after dinner, I sat on the back steps of our little cottage and watched Noah sketch music in his notebook, humming quietly under his breath. The breeze carried the smell of pine and distant rain. "Hey," I said gently, "can we talk for a minute?" He looked up, smiling. "Yeah," I sat beside him. "You remember I told you that I haven't seen my parents in a long time?" He nodded. "They didn't like that you had me. They were afraid," I said carefully, "afraid of what people would think, of what they didn't understand." Noah stayed quiet eyes, studying the grain of the wooden step. They saw the article. I continued. "Your picture. Your music. They want to meet you." He looked up slowly. "Do I have to?" "No," I said quickly. "You don't owe them anything. But I want you to have a choice. That's something I never had." He didn't answer right away, just leaned against my shoulder and sat there. Finally he whispered, "Maybe someday, but not yet." "Okay," I said, wrapping an arm around him. "Whenever you're ready. Or never. That's okay too." He closed his notebook and looked up at the stars. "Do you think Dad would have been proud?" I smiled. "He already is." They arrived at noon. I'd spent the morning tidying more than necessary, wiping down windowsills that were already clean, straightening cushions that Noah would toss aside within minutes. My hands moved on autopilot, but my heart was pacing. Noah sat at the piano, fingers resting gently on the keys, his body still except for the quiet movement of breath. He wasn't nervous, just curious. He hadn't asked many questions, only one. "Do I have to call them anything?" I'd smiled gently. "No, sweetheart. You call them whatever you're comfortable with. Or nothing at all." The doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, smoothing the fabric of my blouse as if that could smooth over the years between then and now. I opened the door. There they were. My father, Edward Bennett, thinner than I remembered, leaning on a cane, his once commanding posture now stooped by time and weight. His eyes scanned the house like he didn't know whether he was allowed to feel impressed. My mother, Mary Ann, her hair fully gray now pulled back into a bun that tried to stay rigid like the woman she used to be. Her eyes found mine almost immediately, and I saw something flicker there. It wasn't regret. Not yet, but maybe the start of recognition. Sophie stood between them. She wore her guilt like a scarf, tight and unspoken. Her hand hovered near my mother's elbow, not quite holding, not quite letting go. Claire Sophie breathed. "Come in," I said simply, stepping aside. They entered slowly, as if afraid the walls would reject them. Their eyes took in the space. Photos of Noah on the walls, a framed newspaper article from the Lincoln Center performance, a vase of fresh lilies on the coffee table. And then Noah stepped into view. He wore a soft blue sweater and dark jeans, his curls slightly tousled from leaning over sheet music. He walked with quiet confidence, his posture straight, his presence magnetic. For a moment no one spoke. My father's eyes widened. My mother gasped softly, a hand flying to her chest. Sophie covered her mouth. Because there he was. Julian's face. Julian's eyes. Julian's quiet strength. I placed a hand on Noah's shoulder. "This is Noah," I said. "My son. And Julian Hayes." Silence wrapped around the room. My mother looked like she might cry, but didn't. My father gripped his cane tighter. "And Sophie." Sophie let the first tear fall. I didn't know she whispered. I didn't know he was sick. I looked at her steady. "You didn't ask." She opened her mouth, closed it, then said with a broken voice, "I was scared. You called me a disgrace," I said quietly. "You stood next to me while they threw me out. You never looked back." Sophie's shoulders folded in on themselves. "I was wrong." I nodded once. That was all I could offer. For now. Noah looked between us, then said, "Would you like to hear something?" Everyone turned to him. He walked to the piano, opened the lid, and sat down. He didn't wait for an answer. The first notes were soft, tentative, as if the piano itself was asking a question. Then came the melody, slow and intentional, each chord unfolding like memory. It was the piece he wrote for Julian. But somehow this version held something else. A new layer. A note of confrontation and release. He played for 5 minutes. When he finished, the silence wasn't heavy. It was full. My father cleared his throat. "He's very gifted." "He's his father's son," I replied. "And mine?" My mother looked at Noah like she wanted to approach, but her feet stayed planted. "He's beautiful," she said, her voice fragile. "You've raised him so well." I turned to face them all. "If you want to be part of his life," I said, "my voice, even you start with the truth. Not by pretending the past didn't happen. You don't get to rewrite it. You don't get to skip the pain and go straight to the pictures on the fridge." They were quiet. Sophie nodded. "I understand." My father looked down at the floor. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I just wanted to meet him." "He knows who he is," I replied. "And he knows who I am. That's all that ever mattered." Noah stood beside me again, slipping his hand into mine. His grip was steady. "He's yours," my mother whispered more to herself than to me. "He always was," I said. "He always will be." They didn't stay long. An hour, maybe. Long enough for Noah to show them his sheet music. For Sophie to tell him he had her eyes, even though he didn't. For my father to say he'd been wrong, though not quite in the way I needed to hear. Before they left, my mother lingered at the doorway. "You're a remarkable woman," she said. "I became one because I had no choice." She didn't argue. When the door closed behind them, I felt something in my chest loosen. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the start of freedom. Noah turned to me. "Was that okay?" he asked. "You were perfect," I said. And he was. They came back the following Sunday. Not with fanfare, no camera crews, no unexpected guests, no tearful ambushes. Just 3 people, slightly older, slightly quieter than they were the week before. Standing on my porch with a box of apple muffins and hands that didn't quite know where to rest. We had coffee on the back deck. The sun filtered through the trees, casting long strips of light on the table. Noah sat between me and the piano, flipping through a music theory book, while Sophie watched him like he might disappear if she blinked. They asked questions about his classes, his favorite composers, whether he preferred Bach or Debussy. My mother complimented the way he crossed his ankles when he sat like Julian used to. My father mostly listened. It was civil, cautious, like stepping across a frozen lake 1 inch at a time. Over the next few weeks they returned. Not often, not urgently. Sometimes they brought fruit. Sometimes just themselves. Once my father dropped off a handmade music stand he'd built in his garage. Sophie emailed Noah a link to an online piano competition and asked if she could come hear him practice sometime. But I made sure they understood the terms. One afternoon, as we sat in the kitchen peeling apples for a pie Noah wanted to try, I laid them out. "I'm glad you're here," I said, looking directly at them. "But I need you to hear this clearly." They both turned toward me. "I'm not asking you to earn your way back in. And I'm not offering you a clean slate. I'm offering space. For something new. But it comes with boundaries." My mother's face stiffened, but she nodded. "You do not get to rewrite the past," I continued. "You don't get to pretend it didn't happen. You don't get to sweep it under a rug made of music recitals and Sunday dinners." My father looked down at the apple in his hand. His knuckles were pale. "Noah is not your redemption arc," I said. "He's not here to make you feel better about who you once were." They stayed quiet. "If you want to be part of his life, be present," I said. "Not for the photos. Not when the newspaper comes calling. Be present when he's struggling with a hard piece or worried about his math test. Show up when there's no spotlight. That's how you earn a place." "And if we mess up," my father asked softly. "You will." I said, "That's part of being human. Just don't disappear again." My mother reached across the table, placing a single slice of apple into the bowl. "We'll try." That night after they left, Noah curled up beside me on the couch, his legs too long now to fit entirely under the blanket we used to share. "Why do you let them come back?" he asked. It wasn't accusatory, just honest curiosity spoken in the quiet way Noah always asked questions he knew mattered. I thought about it for a moment. "Because I forgive," I said, "but I don't forget." He nodded as if that made perfect sense. I didn't tell him how long it took me to learn that difference. That forgiveness wasn't something you offered to erase history. It was something you gave yourself to stop bleeding from it. That remembering was a form of protection, not punishment. One evening I walked past Noah's room on the way to bed. He'd fallen asleep with a book on his chest, the soft rhythm of his breathing rising and falling like the start of a lullaby. I stood at the doorway for a while, just watching him. My mother was already in the hallway. I hadn't heard her come up. She didn't see me at first. She leaned in slowly, her fingers lightly grazing the edge of Noah's blanket. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "Little Claire deserved to be held like this too." I didn't move. She turned, startled when she saw me, but I said nothing. We stood there for a few long seconds. Her, the woman who couldn't hold me when I needed her most, and me, the daughter who had learned to hold herself. I walked past her and into my room, closing the door behind me. Because sometimes silence is the only boundary you have left. Not to punish, but to preserve. The night Noah got his acceptance letter from Juilliard, he didn't scream or jump or run through the house. He just held the envelope in his hands like it was made of glass and looked at me with wide, disbelieving eyes. I think Dad would have smiled," he said quietly. I pulled him into my arms and whispered, "I know he would have." He was 14. Still a boy in so many ways, but already carrying the soul of someone who had lived twice through grief and melody. Watching him grow had been like watching sunlight take shape. He didn't shine loudly. He glowed steadily. To celebrate his scholarship and to keep the mission going, I planned another fundraising gala for the Julian Hayes Foundation. We'd outgrown the community center years ago. This time we hosted it in the atrium of the Hartford Museum of Art. High ceilings, soft string lights, a baby grand in the center of the room. Noah had composed a new piece for the night. Inheritance. He played it as a tribute to Julian, yes, but also to everyone who had carried us when we couldn't carry ourselves. Evelyn, Tina, Maya, even strangers who had mailed $20 checks with crayon-written notes. For someone who needs it, the night was already full of warmth and reverence when I saw them. My parents, Edward and Marianne. But something was different. For the first time in my memory, they didn't come in Sunday best. No ties, no starch, no cross necklaces gleaming like shields. My father wore a soft gray sweater and slacks. My mother had on a simple navy blouse. Their posture wasn't stiff with pride, but softened by time. And maybe by humility. My mother held something in her hands, a small folded envelope. It wasn't ornate, just lined paper yellowed slightly at the edges. They didn't interrupt. They waited until the end of the night after Noah's final bow, and the round of applause had died down after the guests were filtering out, and the room had begun to empty. My father approached slowly. My mother extended the letter toward me. "It's from both of us," she said. We know it's late." I took it without speaking. They didn't wait for me to read it. They only nodded and turned quietly, exiting the building without asking for anything more. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I walked backstage past the rows of empty chairs and leftover programs, past the echoes of conversations and piano notes still vibrating faintly in the air. I sat alone for a moment, the envelope in my hand, and then slipped it into the small wooden box I kept in my bag. A box I'd carried with me since Noah was a baby. Inside it lived Julian's silver ring. Our first family photo from the hospital, a single yellow ribbon from Noah's first recital. And now, this letter, When I finally read it later that night, it said, "Claire, we were wrong. Not once, but for your whole childhood. We didn't see you. We didn't hear you. We chose silence when you needed love, rules when you needed comfort, pride when you needed arms. We will never be able to go back and fix what we broke, but we are sorry. We hope this truth can live beside yours even if it never replaces it." Mom and Dad. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't matter, but because it did. And sometimes what matters most doesn't ask for tears. It asks for space, for stillness, for a quiet nod of recognition that says, "I see the change. I accept it. But I carry my own peace now." That weekend, I added another item to the box, a photo of Noah standing center stage with a bow in one hand and pride in his eyes. Under it, I wrote, "We made it." On Sunday afternoon, as we stood in the kitchen reheating leftover pasta, Noah came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "You looked really proud of me last night," he said into my back. I turned to face him. I am. He tilted his head. "Was there a moment you knew we'd be okay?" I thought for a second, then smiled. "Probably the moment I heard you cry in the delivery room, loud and stubborn like you had something to say before you could even speak." He laughed. And then softer. "We made it." "Mom," I cupped his face gently, thumb brushing his cheek. "Yes," I whispered. "We did." And I meant it, not as a triumph over those who failed us, but as a quiet celebration of everyone who chose to stay, of the love we rebuilt from pieces, of the legacy we carried. Not just Julian's, but our own. Because in the end, that's what legacy is, not what's left behind when we die, but what we choose to live through, what we refuse to abandon, and what we teach others to hold. Have you ever carried the weight of being misunderstood by the very people who were supposed to protect you? Or maybe like Claire, you found healing not through revenge, but through building something stronger in its place. What would you do if the people who broke you came knocking again? We'd love to hear your story. Share in the comments. Your voice might be the one someone else needs today. If this journey touched something in you, help us keep telling stories that matter. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss the next story that might just change how you see your own. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, your scars don't define you. Your strength does.